All right. So in this unit, part of the things you're going to be doing other than reading arguments is you're going to be writing about those arguments and how they're effective. And when you do that, that's called rhetorical analysis writing. And it sounds really fancy and kind of scary, but really you've been analyzing what you've read, what you read since you were in elementary school, right? So in basic terms, uh, writing a rhetorical analysis just means that you're going to explain or analyze how a writer builds or develops his or her argument. Okay, so I know it feels like this guy over here, right? Like writers just do this magic thing, um, and they are just so good with words and so good with what they want to say that they can just put it all together quickly and magically, and the magic just comes out of the typewriter or out of the computer. That's not true, right? It's hard work, and they put a lot of thought and revision into it, and kind of keep working at their craft. So, and when you do rhetorical analysis, you're looking at the big pieces, the thesis statement or the argument. What is that? How is it developed? How do they develop and support that thesis? So, like, what examples do they use? Um, do they do definitions? Do they do examples from their own lives, like anecdotes? Do they use statistics or facts? That kind of stuff. Um, how is it organized? Do they compare and contrast? Do they do cause and effect? All those things matter and how effective the argument is. And then also the smaller pieces, right? The word choice, the specific words that they choose to build that argument, to create tone, to put a picture in your head or an image in your head of what they're trying to say, and the syntax or the sentence structure. A lot of times we don't think about that, at least at first, and but that really matters. Long sentences, short sentences, having a lot of sentences that kind of look the same in a row, and then breaking that pattern. All those things matter. And then I put rhetorical devices at the bottom, because there's a lot of rhetorical devices, and it really doesn't matter that you know all of them, right? But repetition is one, rhetorical question is another. Like putting a question in your writing that will not be answered, it just gives the reader something to think about, right? And the reason I put it at the bottom is because all the rhetorical devices out there are come down to word choice and sentence structure. What words did they choose? How did they create their sentences? And why? What's the effect of that? So the reason why this is important is it's just like um, driving a car, right? If you just read a piece for fun, it's like just knowing how a car moves. You put gas in it, someone's on the steering wheel, and somebody uses the gas pedal and the brake to move the car around, right? You know that because you've ridden in cars and you've seen cars your whole lives. Now, when you want to learn how to drive, you have to learn other things, right? How the feel of the steering wheel, how much to push in the gas or the brakes, the blinkers, and how to keep distance from others, and all those things, right? And that's what writing rhetorical analysis does, and discussing rhetorical analysis. It gives you a feel for what the writer does, so you know how to do it yourself, right? And just like driving, you have to practice driving. You actually have to do it, just not just see a car in action or be in a car. You have to be the driver in order to get good at driving. And you probably want to learn a few other things too, right? You want to learn how to maybe change a tire, gas up, change your oil, a couple of small things in order to be a really successful driver. And that's the same thing as a writer. You want to learn how to do these things and how to build these things, and how writers do it, so that you can be successful at it as well whenever you have to write an argument or present an argument, or whenever someone is giving you an argument, whether it's your boss or a coworker or a friend or a family member or someone who's running for office who wants your vote, right? So knowing how these things work is important. Now, I'm going to use some big fancy terminology, and my writing example might be a little intimidating to you, but please don't let it be, because, like in this analogy where you're learning how to drive and learning a few things about how the car works, I'm like a mechanic, right? I know a lot more about this than you do, and this is sort of my profession, my job. So if you look at my example and you're like, "Oh, this looks like I don't know if I can write like that," that's okay. I just want to make sure you know how to drive and can change your tire, right, and your gas, um, and let me be the mechanic and kind of show you the ins and outs. Okay, so this is my teacher model. And in mine, I just analyzed how John Mulaney uses the organizing pattern of compare and contrast, but I could have picked anything from that previous slide: the thesis, the development of ideas, I could have picked the word choice or the sentence structure. And we talked all about that in the reading lesson. But for this example, I just wanted to focus on one of those things, which was the organizational pattern compare and contrast. Okay. John Mulaney primarily organizes his 2018 Saturday Night Live monologue using the compare and contrast organizational pattern. He starts his monologue by giving two examples of how people spend their free times in the old days. First, he points out that people were building gazebos in Connecticut during the Civil War. Then Mulaney mentions that people would get all dressed up just to wave at strangers as they sailed by in ships. Mulaney switches to present day and suggests that people spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to prove to websites that they are not robots so they can access their accounts and other information. These activities from the old days are different because they are outdoors, while the present day activity mentioned is indoors and on a computer or smartphone. While the activities are very different, they have one thing in common. They are a humorous waste of time. Mulaney compares and contrasts these activities to argue no matter which time period or activities you prefer, people have always spent their time doing silly things. All right, so that's my analysis of this. Now, I've got three big components here that you always need in your paragraphs when you're doing either literary analysis or rhetorical analysis, and really almost any kind of writing. Okay. You need either a topic sentence or a main idea sentence. And all that is a sentence somewhere in your paragraph that lets the reader know what is the main point of this paragraph. What information are you trying to give me? And the information I'm trying to give you is that Mulaney uses the compare and contrast organizational pattern in his monologue. Right? I chose to put that as my first sentence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Okay. The next thing, and that's in dark red here, the next thing you always need when you're doing this sort of thing is evidence from the text or the video or whatever you're watching. Now, it could be direct text evidence where you take specific words from the text, or it could be a summary or a paraphrase, right? And I decided to kind of use summary or paraphrase here because his examples were so long that I thought it would have taken way more room in my writing to like take the direct text evidence from there. And I think I could just kind of summarize it because you had read it too or seen it too, and get to the point much faster. So whenever you have like really, really big chunks of text evidence like that, I think summary or paraphrasing is a really good technique. Whereas if you're just looking at like maybe a sentence or so or less of text evidence, it's probably better just to directly state it. But that's the choice you make as a writer, and that's why I decided to use summary instead of specific text evidence, in case you're wondering. All right, so after that, I need analysis or commentary, right? Or another way to put that is explain. I need to explain to you what the writer is doing here, or what Mulaney's doing here. I need to explain why he's using the compare and contrast. And I just wanted to point out that I did explain that he used compare and contrast because it may not have seemed that way in the video, but I did that by showing how they're different, right? One is in the old days, one is in the new days, and one is the old days are outdoors, while the present day stuff is indoors. But I did also compare them, right? What do they have in common? And they both have in common this ridiculous activity. So I did talk through the compare and contrast piece and kind of prove that that is a compare and contrast organizational pattern. I think that's part of my job as the writer to prove that he did that. And then I explain or give a commentary analysis as to why he did it. Like, what's the effect of it? What was the purpose of using this organizational pattern and using these examples? And he wants us to say, okay, you think people in the old days were silly? We're pretty silly too, and vice versa, right? If you think we're silly now, we've always been silly. We were doing silly stuff in the 1800s as well. Okay. It's really good to kind of practice this writing because it's way easier to read something and have a great idea in your head. And then it's harder to kind of speak that out in discussion, but it's really like next level difficult in terms of intellectual ability, or like a rigorous task to write it out and make sure you're clear when you write. So I know it's like you're like, oh, we just talked about this, we just discussed this, now I got to write it. Yeah, because when you write it, you're taking your ideas to the next level, because when you write it and you have to like read it and make some choices about whether or not you're clear and you've given enough explanation, that's where the real mental activity comes in. And every time you do that, it's like working with a puzzle, right? It's or building something, and like just the payoff is just so much for you as a writer and as a thinker when you have to make those choices all the time. So that's an example of how to do this, how to do some rhetorical analysis writing. And I hope that helps you in your writing as well.